When an empath endures a narcissist's toxicity and emerges, Carl Jung noted they don't merely mend, they metamorphose into a force the narcissist never anticipated. The individual who once soaked up all projections becomes impervious. The spirit that shouldered the darkness of others builds a complete resistance to manipulative tactics. What's truly stunning is that their existence alone starts compelling others to confront the very shadows they cast outward. Envision this. You held their fury, their disgrace, their void, until your own reflection became a stranger. You were the psychic landfill for their unresolved agony, and they departed, spotless, leaving you to navigate the debris of their internal chaos. Yet, a transformation begins, not with loud confrontation, but with a silent, chilling lucidity. You cease justifying your existence to those who were always deaf. You no longer sponge up feelings that don't belong to you. And most crushingly for them, you withdraw from their constant emotional crises. This journey is what Jung termed individuation. I call it the emergence of psychological autonomy. The being who arises from this ordeal is not the same one who was snared in the narcissist ES trap. It is a completely new archetype, one Jung knew could redefine all surrounding connections. However, a common misunderstanding is that this evolution occurs through counseling or reading self-improvement literature. Instead, it unfolds through what Jung described as the night sea journey, a plunge into a psychic inferno that shatters you so thoroughly that nothing but your true self is left. The empath who endures this voyage becomes a figure Jung recorded but seldom discussed publicly. They evolve into what I term the shadow walker. This is an individual who has gazed into the chasm of human shadow and come back, their essence not extinguished, but profoundly altered. As Jung stated, a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. This dynamic between the empath and narcissist is that very inferno, a psychic forge that either annihilates you or reshapes you into something unprecedented. This process is not mere healing. It is evolution. It's a leap in consciousness that Jung saw as vital for the psychological growth of humankind. In their insatiable need to devour your spirit, the narcissist inadvertently triggers your most significant metamorphosis. While they believe they are breaking you, they are, in fact, tempering you into a substance that cannot be broken. Jung dedicated decades to researching what he called psychological types, and he observed a troubling pattern in highly sensitive people. They tend to become what I refer to as shadow containers, unconsciously conditioned to absorb the psychic refuse that others decline to handle. Jung noted, "The healthy man does not torture others. Typically, it is the tormented who evolve into tormentors. But empaths form a third classification, those who take in the torment without inflicting it on others. This fosters what Jung called participation mystique, an unconscious fusion where the empath cannot differentiate their own feelings from the projections they've absorbed. The narcissist callously leverages this weakness, employing the empath's sensitivity as a psychic disposal site. Yet, this is where Jung's wisdom becomes vital. He saw that this pattern of exploitation has an evolutionary function. Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." The empath-narcissist dynamic compels this outgrowing in the harshest manner imaginable. It's consciousness evolution via trauma, psychological maturation through crisis. The narcissist embodies what Jung called the denied shadow, all the darkness they will not see in themselves. The empath serves as the vessel for this unacknowledged shadow, but by carrying it, they start to comprehend darkness in a way that radically shifts their view of reality. Jung held that consciousness evolves through struggle, and the empath-narcissist relationship is one of the most severe accelerators of consciousness known. The empath doesn't just observe this shadow content. They are made to carry it until they gain what I call shadow literacy. the capacity to interpret psychological darkness as if it were a native tongue. If you have ever felt you were shouldering someone else's emotional burdens, comment, "I was their shadow container." Jung chronicled the experience he named the dark night of the soul. For empaths in relationships with narcissists, however, this turns into what I describe as the shadow immersion experience. You are not merely a witness to darkness. You are compelled to dwell within it. The narcissist's projections do more than cause pain. They overwrite your internal programming. Their shame manifests as your self-doubt. Their anger becomes your anxiety. Their inner void translates into your depression. You effectively absorb their psychological poisons until your own sense of self dissolves. Jung referred to this as psychological poisoning. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." For empaths, this pain transcends the personal. It is collective. You find yourself processing shadow material from generations of unhealed trauma. The narcissist shoves you into what Jung called the negrado, the blackening stage of alchemy, where everything solid breaks down into chaos. Jung noted, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. But to find that order, you must first survive the chaos." Here's what Jung realized about this poisoning. The psyche possesses an immune response. As foreign psychological matter is forced upon your consciousness, your genuine self begins to create what I term shadow antibodies that learn to detect manipulation on a core level. This is what makes the empath's transformation so deep. You don't just learn about manipulation on an intellectual level. Your very nervous system develops a physical rejection of psychological venom. Jung wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." The empath who survives narcissistic abuse has consciously integrated more darkness than most people face in their entire lives. You become what Jung called a wounded healer, though not in the typical sense. You are wounded by another's unconscious shadow, but you heal by bringing that same shadow into consciousness. Jung observed, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed." This is precisely what befalls the surviving empath. They acquire a steadfast inner tranquility, born from confronting the absolute worst and enduring. Jung analyzed what he termed ego death, the point where your constructed sense of self entirely falls apart. For empaths escaping narcissistic abuse, this death is especially harsh because their identity was founded on being supportive, understanding, and emotionally accessible. The breaking point isn't loud, it's a silent, dreadful realization. You wake one day to find a stranger in the mirror. Your empathy seems gone. Your optimism feels corrupted. Your capacity for trust feels irreparably broken. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But for an empath at their lowest, there appears to be no self remaining to accept. You have absorbed so much external psychological material that your true self has been buried. This is Jung's negrado, the alchemical blackening stage where all that was certain dissolves. Jung noted, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate. It oppresses." Yet accepting this psychological death seems impossible when you no longer know who is performing the act of acceptance. You have been so fixated on the inner worlds of others that you've lost connection to your own. But Jung's understanding of this dissolution changes everything. He stated, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This choice only becomes available once the false self has completely died. The old identity must be gone for the authentic self to arise. The narcissist, in their unceasing assault on your identity, accidentally acts as the demolisher of your false self, the persona built on appeasing others and dodging conflict. This is why I refer to narcissists as inadvertent shamans. They conduct a psychic dismemberment that forces individuation in ways that years of therapy may never accomplish. Jung wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. The narcissist drives you so deep into psychological nonsense that you have no choice but to discover your own sense. In this void, something primal awakens." Jung called it the self, the archetype of wholeness that lies beneath all conditioning. The empath learns they are not their trauma, their absorbed feelings, or their compulsive caregiving. They are something immeasurably more powerful. Jung stated, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For most, this remains a theoretical privilege. But the empath who survives narcissistic abuse does not just grasp this quote. They live it at a cellular level, having been stripped bare of every inauthentic identity. Jung was captivated by alchemy, viewing it as a symbolic representation of psychological change. The empath's path mirrors what Jung termed the opus contra naturam, a work against nature that creates something unprecedented. What comes out of this psychological furnace is not the same empath who began the relationship. It's what I call the integrated empath, one who retains their sensitivity but shields it with impenetrable psychological boundaries. Jung detailed this change in his concept of the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to forge something new from the fusion of opposites. The surviving empath has united their shadow and light, their victimhood and victory, their wound and their wisdom. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The key difference is the narcissist stays unconscious while the empath becomes hyper-aware. This integration establishes what Jung called psychological sovereignty, or what I term shadow immunity. You become effectively immune to manipulation because you can now perceive psychological projections before they ever reach you. It's akin to gaining night vision after being forced to live in absolute darkness. The narcissist's tactics that once devastated you now have no effect, like water on a slick surface. Not because you've hardened, but because you've awakened." Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The transformed empath has made manipulation tactics conscious, thereby stripping them of their power. You can see the puppet strings long before the show starts. But here, the transformation gains its true force. The integrated empath doesn't just fend off manipulation. Their sheer presence dismantles it. Jung called this the constellation effect, where one person's state of consciousness influences everyone nearby. Jung noted, "As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." The transformed empath becomes this very light, not a naive flame to be consumed, but a brilliant one that illuminates shadows wherever it falls. Comment if you've gotten to the stage where attempts at manipulation seem transparent and futile. I see through the matrix now. Jung dedicated years to outlining archetypes, the universal patterns of human existence. But he pointed to one archetype that only forms through severe psychological trials, what I call the shadow walker. This is someone who has trekked through psychological hell and returned with hidden knowledge. The shadow walker archetype personifies Jung's wounded healer, but with a critical distinction. Conventional wounded healers help others through their own injuries. Shadow walkers heal others through their own completeness. Jung wrote, "Everyone you meet knows something you don't know, but need to know. Learn from them." The shadow walker has learned what most people studiously avoid: how to traverse the bleakest territories of human psychology without being lost to them. You become the living embodiment of psychological sovereignty's possibility. Your existence challenges the unconscious agreements that keep others ensnared in dysfunctional dynamics. Jung observed, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. This explains why your presence is so unsettling after your transformation. You are no longer taking part in the collective unconsciousness that Jung saw as the source of human suffering. You have exited the matrix of projection and manipulation. Jung stated, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. The shadow walker has unequivocally won this battle. You have developed what I call tribal immunity, the power to preserve your individual consciousness while immersed in group unconsciousness. But this triumph brings a kind of solitude. Jung described it as the loneliness of the individuated. The cost of consciousness is a separation from the unconscious herd." Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. However, this loneliness is not a void. It is filled with a genuine self-connection that few ever achieve. You realize that being alone with your authentic self is far better than being with people who only see you through their projections." Jung noted, "To be normal is the ultimate aim of the unsuccessful." The shadow walker has moved beyond the need for normalcy, having found something more precious, the capacity to be real. Jung discovered that highly individuated individuals act as what I call consciousness mirrors. Their presence makes others see themselves with clarity, often for the first time. The transformed empath becomes such a mirror. But unlike the passive mirrors they were, reflecting what others wished to see, they now reflect the unvarnished truth. This triggers what Jung called projection withdrawal. When people can no longer project their shadows onto you, they must face them internally. For the unconscious, this is deeply unsettling and explains why your change often provokes strong reactions. Some will despise you for this mirroring. They will label you as cold, different, or unstable. Jung understood this response well, writing, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but most choose irritation over understanding. Others will be irresistibly drawn to your transformation. They perceive something new about you, a presence that feels both alluring and formidable." Jung called this the numinous effect, when archetypal power becomes manifest in a person. If people began treating you differently after your change, comment, "My energy shifted and everyone felt it." But the most powerful effect is on other empaths still caught in narcissistic webs. Your existence becomes the evidence that escape is achievable, that transformation is real, and that they are not doomed to remain psychological captives. Jung saw a paradox in psychological growth. True power is not found in controlling others, but in controlling yourself so thoroughly that others cannot control you. The transformed empath is the perfect embodiment of this paradox. They gain immense power precisely because they no longer seek power over anyone else. They have found what Jung called the treasure hard to attain, complete self-possession. Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." The transformed empath lives this principle fully. Their boundaries are not threats or demands. They are simply their reality. They don't declare their limits. They embody them. This generates what I call paradoxical magnetism. The more self-sufficient you become, the more people are drawn to you. The less you require their validation, the more they desire yours. The less you are available for their emotional offloading, the more they honor your boundaries. Jung said, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking." The transformed empath has moved beyond the will to power through love, but love of self first. This self-love is not narcissistic. It is what Jung called appropriate self-regard, the cornerstone of all healthy connections. You can only offer others what you have yourself. And the transformed empath has something precious, unwavering self-worth. Jung observed, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." The empath who has overcome narcissistic abuse has been forced into a state of radical self-acceptance. Not the easy kind, but the kind that is forged in flames. Here is where the paradox deepens. By refusing to serve as anyone's emotional dumping ground, you open yourself to authentic connections as never before. By saying no to manipulation, you make room for genuine love. Jung wrote, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness." The transformed empath has a visceral understanding of this balance. They can hold space for another's darkness without absorbing it. You become what Jung called a container, but now a conscious one with firm boundaries, not an unconscious sponge soaking up everyone's psychic effluent. Jung identified that certain individuals are called to what he called the guardian function, shielding others from psychological predators by their very way of being. The transformed empath frequently embodies this guardian archetype, not through aggressive action, but through impenetrable boundaries that act as a model for others. Jung wrote, "To ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem." Your boundaries become the question that forces others to look at their own psychological behaviors. You become what I call a boundary beacon, living proof that psychological autonomy is attainable. Other empaths witness your transformation and start to believe in the possibility of their own freedom. This guardian role functions through what Jung termed morphic resonance. Your level of consciousness literally elevates the consciousness of people around you. You need not do anything but exist authentically. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the transformed empath's reactions are now deliberate choices, not unconscious reflexes. You select which chemical reactions to engage in based on your highest good, not on others' needs. This discernment is not coldness, it's consciousness." Jung knew that indiscriminate giving is often a subconscious addiction to being needed, not true compassion. Jung noted, "Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research." For many empaths, this research period includes decades of unconscious absorption. The transformation marks a graduation from research to conscious existence. You become a guardian not by lecturing, but by living. Jung wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity." Your transformed presence generates new possibilities for others because you are proof that authentic selfhood can be achieved. You don't have to persuade anyone. Your very being makes the case for psychological liberation. Jung warned of what he called the integration trap, the risk of identifying so strongly with your transformation that you become rigid and swing to the other extreme. Some transformed empaths go from being completely open to being completely walled off. They confuse hardness with strength and solitude with safety. But real integration, what Jung called the union of opposites, involves preserving both your empathy and your boundaries, your compassion and your standards. The objective isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel with awareness. Jung wrote, "Emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it." The integrated empath experiences everything but is consumed by nothing. They can witness another's suffering without internalizing it, offer help without self-sacrifice, and love with depth without losing their own identity. This equilibrium is fragile and demands what Jung called constant vigilance. The old habits of absorption and codependency may try to return, especially under stress. But once you have experienced psychological freedom, you can never fully revert to unconscious servitude. Your psyche has been fundamentally rewired. Jung believed that personal transformation leads inevitably to collective transformation. He wrote, "The individual is the only reality. The further we move away from the individual towards abstract ideas, the more likely we are to fall into error." The transformed empath generates what I call consciousness ripples. Their individual liberty grants others the permission to pursue their own. This occurs without any need for preaching. It happens through embodiment. People feel a difference in your energy and start to re-examine their own lives. You become living proof that emotional abuse is not a life sentence, that empathy does not demand self-annihilation, and that sensitivity and strength can coexist. Some will attempt to drag you back into old dynamics with guilt, manipulation, or feigned emergencies. Jung called this the crab bucket effect, unconscious opposition to another person's growth. But your transformation has made you resistant to these methods. You see them for what they are, projections of others' own entrapment, not valid appeals for aid. If you see yourself in this transformative journey, comment, "My healing became my superpower." The empath who survives the narcissist's darkness doesn't just recover, they evolve into a new level of consciousness that Jung's writings could only allude to. You become evidence that the human spirit is more resilient than we knew, that consciousness can rise from the bleakest of situations, that true power is found not in dominating others, but in completely mastering oneself. The narcissist believed they were extinguishing your light. Instead, they unintentionally forged it into something unbreakable. They thought they were annihilating your empathy. Instead, they refined it into conscious compassion that cannot be manipulated. Your transformation becomes a signal for other empaths still held in psychological captivity, demonstrating that freedom is not only possible but inevitable once you grasp the underlying dynamics. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Your ordeal with narcissistic abuse forced you to look inward so profoundly that you found the indestructible center of your being. That center was always present. The narcissist merely stripped away everything that was not authentically you. If you wish to learn more about distinguishing between your authentic self and absorbed projections, see my video on 8 signs. You're not meant for this world where I explore Jung's insights on those who see reality differently from the unconscious majority. Your sensitivity was never a flaw. It was your superpower, awaiting activation through conscious integration. Thank you for joining me on this path of transformation. I'll see you on the next level of consciousness.